we are very excited tonight to have as our speaker Amos White. He is the founder and chief planter of 100,000 Trees for Humanity. So are you like on tree, like, 1010 maybe? Okay, anyway, he's a very creative person. He writes haiku, he does poetry, he plants trees, and he is the founder of this nonprofit, an executive at this nonprofit at the intersection of environment, technology, and climate. So with that, Amos, it's all yours.
Hello, and thank you so very much. And I just have to say thank you for such a warm and resounding welcome. I'm really excited to see that there are other people that are up and at home on 7:45 on a Friday. But hey, where else would we be given shelter in place in the current reality that we're in? I'm going to make this an open conversation. Don't treat me like a speaker. Again, we're all having coffees or drinks and on Friday, and I want to make this open. I'm more interested in what I don't know, because there's more information out here than there is between here and or with what I'm doing. So yeah, my name's Amos. I founded 100,000 Trees for Humanity back in the fall, October of 2019, coming off of climate strike. Thanks to Greta Thunberg and working with a host of people here in the Bay Area, especially here in the city of Alameda on our island, to support youth, to raise their voices, and working from our environmental task force here, CASA. We were able to really draw attention to just what is going on. This is not new news. I mean, yeah, everybody can go back to what we all know that for most of us started this was, Al Gore and An Inconvenient Truth. Prior to that, there's a host of individuals that have raised the alarm. Whether it was David Brower, or whether it was with the book Silent Spring. There's a litany of history and people in history that have been calling attention to our impact on this planet, And the evidence has been there actually since the turn of last century at 1900. The evidence in 1800s, scientists and mercantilists knew what the scientific impact of burning coal was doing on the environment. It's not new news, and it's not about any particular conspiracy at all. It's literally jumping to go. And that's what 100,000 Trees for Humanity is all about. It's about putting roots on the ground. I'll repeat that. It's about putting roots on the ground and getting the job done. 4 days ago, the IPCC, the United Nations IPCC committee, put out its report. To put one word to it, drastic. In poetry, in theater, in writing, that was called a pregnant pause. Because it's not about me, it's not about us, it's not about this organization. This is real. And it isn't something we've all trained for. But many of us have pivoted where it's no longer an avocation to be interested or supportive of the environment. It's now an existential charge. The last 4 years for a number of us in forming a resistance was an existential charge, depending on who you were. Women, LGBTQ, Blacks, trans, if you were an immigrant. That was very real. But now the whole society and our planet is similarly faced with its own reality, that our mere existence and lack of attention to the carbon we are emitting knowingly will cause extreme discomfort and continued calamity until we can focus our energies on being the solution. Who knows? What year is this? I can't do math. It's COVID. I guess I'm around 55 or 56, depending on which year it is. It's 2021, so it's odd. I'm 56 years old, I guess. For some 30 odd years, I have been, or actually no, 40 years, I have been engaged and involved in community organizing. Starting when I was 17, my first campaign, not for me, but organizing students to get involved in local elections. It may have been a challenge from a teacher, but I remember it fairly well. I was on my own path at that time to get into, and which I did, political science and also English at Wittenberg University. I had a goal of being an astronaut and president, and I was just completely taken with and idolized the astronauts, particularly Senator John Glenn. I was from Columbus, Ohio, Bexley, Ohio. He was my senator. I was in the state seat, and they had an office there. I went off to college. A lot of story we'll leave in the background, but don't you know, coming out of college, one of my first jobs I had, I literally became the legislative aide to none other than John Glenn. You could have stuck a fork in me. You could have stuck 100 forks in me. I was done. And I'll be very honest, there was nothing else I wanted to do or wanted to be other than go to astronaut training school, NASA, the whole 9 yards. But it literally, and the reason was I literally wanted to see the Earth. You remember this TV show, you guys? We're all going to date ourselves. You know what it is. 3 words. Big Blue Marble. Does anybody remember that show? The Big Blue Marble. And I want to say it was either PBS or off of WGBH Boston. I was from Ohio, so it could have been a regional broadcast. But it was a show which actually gave us perspective for the first time to think about what is it like to live on Earth? What is it like to see this blue marble in space and think about what makes the blue? What is all this space? And think about oxygen and think about clouds. Funny enough, walking to this meeting, as I told you, I had to grab a coffee. Walking into this meeting, I was thinking, which I will do, contact a good friend of mine who's one of the last words before we parted 20 years ago. He lives here in Berkeley, but I haven't seen him since in a long time. Dr. Steinauer, his one of his parting words to me was, "Hey, do you want me to make you a cloud?" And he actually knows the science to, within a confined space, make a cloud. And that got me thinking, walking into this meeting, as I'm looking at this fog in Alameda, which we haven't had a regular summer, a foggy summer, which means humidity, which means not a dry summer, hopefully, which means no wildfires or threat of local fires, but hopefully more humidity out across the rest of California too for our trees. It's that idea and that way of thinking I literally got by wanting to be an astronaut and thinking about what does it mean and what do we look like from space. So from there, fast forward, done a lot of things and very involved in our community. With the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force here in the Bay Area, which I vice chair. We are getting all 101 cities, all 9 county municipalities and governments to realign their budgets, let's just say decarbonize their budgets by running them through their through their climate action plans. so that they impact their frontline communities first. The work that we're all doing has been so high level, policy work, resistance, calling for governments to do the right thing. We're still in a waiting mode. The one thing that struck me most that really was the clarion call, 2019, when Greta said, not what she said, but how she was not accusing, but criticizing, literally crying out. And when a child cries, if a parent doesn't respond in kind and with the same order of magnitude, not just to soothe, but to we ourselves understand what the child is feeling or what the children are feeling. What is their world? Not to explain it, well, this too shall pass. No, it's to connect with their reality and be with them in true empathy, either to hold and soothe or to ameliorate. And when I saw that governments could not, did not, and that adults and parents, we did not stay on the front line of the protests until the policies changed, until the budgets changed, until money flowed and we were planting trees, we were subsidizing EVs, electric vehicles, and or solar, and or rebates for heat pumps, and moving people through a just transition at war mode. When that did not happen, colleagues and I, literally, it was almost a mourning fest, but it didn't last 24 hours coming off of the march. Colleagues and I, I read this article. It wasn't Christina Figueres. It was someone else. It could have been Catherine Hayhoe. And they are by profession, she was in charge of writing I think it's the Congressional climate assessment for the US. And I think it was Catherine Hayhoe, who's an evangelical Christian, but also a scientist and also a climate, if you will, change, not supporter, but a person who does not deny and stands on the science and is a fierce advocate for us to change our ways in order to impact the planet positively. And I read this article in either Grist or Yes Magazine or Ms. I thought it was like Ms. Magazine online. And it was a horrible clickbait title. And the title said, "The planet's going to get a lot hotter. Here's how you can survive it." And I was like, oh, wow. And I knew right then and there as a marketer, that's clickbait. They're just trying to increase clicks. It's probably good information, but really, did you guys that, who I respect did you really just go there to get clicks? Sure enough. And it was, I clicked it. And I went there and it was probably one of the most boring and bereft of information that I thought was going to be there, where she's imparting sagacious wisdom on how do you negotiate Congress? How do you persuade them? What are they going to listen to? What scientists need to do? None of that was there. And I read that whole thing twice thinking I must have missed something here. And it was September or August of 2019. And there was only one paragraph that stood out. And in that paragraph, it specifically only regarded her work as a psychiatrist or psychologist. And it spoke only of to one thing. And this is literally upon which our entire organization's theory of change is predicated upon. And you'll see this. We don't plant trees. And you'll see how we don't plant trees. She said in the paragraph, we deal with severely depressed people in my profession. I deal with severely depressed people, she said. And she said, there's only two things that we can do therapy-wise And the one thing we do is we know we have to get them to rewire their brains, because the way the pathways and the information's flowing, they believe everything is either a threat, dismal, will not happen, is attacking them. And therefore they completely retreat and they can't see themselves into a future positively. And there's nothing affirming or supporting that. So we have to get them to rewire their brains. And she said there's two ways to do that, either drug therapy or like talk therapy, you know, couch, talking to your therapist. And she says in the talk therapy model, she said, well, what did you call it? I'm sorry, conference? Oh, sorry, I thought someone said something. But in the talk model, she said, you know, you're on the couch and you're talking to your therapist. She says, we only need two things to happen. And she said, first, and one, we need as therapists to get them to do one thing, one act that they have a sense of agency over. They need to do one thing that they have a sense of agency over. And I was like, okay, this is not going anywhere. And if that's what therapy is all about, you know, wow. And then I said, okay. And then it said part two or second. The one thing that they do that they have agency over, the one thing that they do has to give them positive feedback or pleasure or make them feel good or happy. And I said, okay, you get them to talk and to do one thing that they have a sense of agency over that makes them feel good. And I'm sitting here going, okay. And then she says, and then we get them to do it again. And it hit, the lightning bolt didn't go off, but there was a small flash on the beginning. And I said, you know what? Sounds familiar. Why? Because 20 some odd years ago, or actually 27 to be exact, I had the pleasure of a friend of mine introduced me to this guy named of Anthony Robbins in Los Angeles when I was living down there in North Hollywood, or where was I? Not North Hollywood, living in somewhere. I forget what it's called, up in one of the gates. And I met him, and we went out for like drinks. He was coming out of the Forum for some event, probably a basketball game, and literally just met the guy and just had a great conversation. I had no idea who the guy was, and I think he was kind of just starting in his career. It was, like I said, 27 years ago. I don't know where he was in his career, but my sister ended up having his book 4 years later when I moved from LA up to San Francisco or Oakland. I stayed at her house for a couple months before I got my own place. And she had his book on her shelf. And I said, hey, I know this guy. And she goes, what do you mean you know him? I'm like, yeah, it's, LA, you run into people, which you do a lot. And I pulled it off and I started reading it, but I already knew a little bit of what he told me. He said, I was living in Venice and Beach. And I told him, that was the first place I wanted to move to from Ohio. I wanted to live on a boat in either Venice or Marina del Rey. And, I started to and got a place there with my dog. I wanted to just live on this boat and yada. And we started talking, but he says, yeah, well, I was living in this flat, and he told me where. And I was like, good gosh, I know the place. And he says, yeah, I was pretty depressed. And he tells me this story where this huge guy who basically is just stunning and, good looking and just so charismatic and so whatever, but this is him now. He literally was suffering from massive depression and couldn't see where he was in his life and where he was going to go. And he wasn't in the best of straits. And he literally was like day by day on the edge. And he said one day he decided he was just going to do one thing for himself. Sound familiar? He was going to do one thing for himself. And he said, and once he did that, he was going to write it down. He said, first I wrote down what I was going to do. And eventually throughout the day, somewhere he found it. He found the strength, courage, or focus to actually do the one thing. Once he did, he actually wrote down that he completed it or checked it off on the paper. And at that evening, he made it a point to celebrate the fact that he did it. I'm getting misty. The logic is so plain and clear. The guy healed himself, one task, one day at a time, by accomplishing, recognizing, identifying, completing, celebrating, self-affirming, rewired himself. We all don't have that amount of immense strength, but guess what? We all do. That's when the light bulb went off for me 2 weeks later. I woke up one Sunday morning, which I do on Sundays, ever since we had our first .com back in the early aughts, like 2002. I always woke up on Sunday and my mind's just doing its own thing. And somehow my arm's stretched up into the air like this. And I'm looking at my hand, my palm wide open. Seriously, I don't know if any of you guys go through this, but it's usually on Sundays, like my brain just does its thing after it's had 2 nights to just decompress and 2 days where I don't have to think of stuff basically about work, but of course we all do. And I was sitting there going, and it started to play again. I said, one thing that they have agency over. And it was like this koan. I couldn't get out of my head. I'm like, the whole article was boring, but why am I still focused on this one paragraph? And that's when the tree popped in my hand. You know, that trite, cliche image of a hand with a little bit of dirt and a sapling on it. Everybody's seen it on every environmental website. Probably every blog you first started had that same trite image on it. And it's been there. It's been there. It's been there. And I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh. And that is exactly the answer. We're going to put one tree in every person's hand. And the brain is already releasing the endorphins, which makes you feel good because you know what is going to happen next. I'll hold that right there. Pause. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, when asked in an interview at one point, he said, how can you do this day in, day out? People are being lynched. You're on the front lines. They're besetting dogs upon you. Black people haven't had it easy. And you're still going out here telling people they shall overcome. How can you do this day in and day out? Roughly paraphrasing it poorly, me. But his response was, even if I knew that the world would end tomorrow, I would still go out today in my backyard and plant my apple tree. That's when the theory of change was a thunderclap that Sunday morning. By putting a tree in every person's hand, we are both connecting them to the earth in their hand first, to the ground next. We are rooting ourselves back where we have become so disassociated from, with screens. I'm an internet marketer, or was, from screens and internet and Snapchat and Instagram and Instagram and Instagram and likes and all of that. We have gotten away from nature. Even Kaiser right now, instead of prescribing therapy, prescribes walks up in the park or out on the beach. Kaiser Permanente, based on their theory of thrive. They know what we're missing. 2, 100,000 trees for humanity is a carbon sequestration, reforestation initiative. Elizabeth, if you could enable everybody to share their screens, that would be good. and I'll pop mine on here.
I will do that. I'll put this on gallery view.
When
Sorry,
you,
I just got called away
It's all good.
for
I was
somebody else's.
vamping until you
It
got
was
back.
somebody else's emergency. Okay.
But 100,000 trees for humanity. We are a carbon sequestration, urban reforestation solution. We got our name, which somebody will ask, based on another thing. With CASA, our urban action or our environmental task force here in Alameda. We assisted in our city's climate action plan. And in that plan, in the consultant's report, prior to that plan being written, I read in the consultant's report that they said our island city of Alameda, which is 26.5 square miles, the exact same square miles as Manhattan Island. Manhattan Island. Yeah, blew my mind. Go to Wikipedia. I know you will. Don't worry, Christina, I'm watching her write it down now. Go to Wikipedia, same exact square miles, 26.2, and they're 26.6, we're 26.2. And it said that our island could sustain, on average, 1 new tree per capita resident. 1 new tree per capita resident as our natural solutions portion of our climate action plan. That means for planting trees or for spreading biochar. And 1 new tree per capita person by 2030 we're currently 78,000, and in 10 years, we're going to be 80,000. That means we could plant 80,000 trees. Now, being a student of English and being a marketer and also in sales, but also in music, you learn to listen and follow patterns. You understand the brain is the most supreme pattern recognition machine there is. And in music, it's all about rhythms, repetitions, those patterns, those cycles. In sales and marketing, and in that, there's something called the Pareto Principle, otherwise known as the 80-20 rule. 20% of any organization does 80% of the load or the labor. Most of us know that in households, right? But it holds true. It held true almost to a number in sales when I was in marketing with our companies and back in the day. And I ended up seeing it further happen in fractal iterations. That 20%, there was always another 80-20, where within that 20%, 20% of the 20% or 4% would actually end up doing 80% of that total 20%'s load, either in terms of purchasing or contacts or what have you. It keeps going to where you actually get in that 20%, it's 1%, where you end up getting the 99-9-1 rule. You could get that on Wikipedia as well. But I noticed these patterns, and I said, wait, if 80,000, and we all know a bell curve starts here, and if in Alameda, they said on average, we could do 1 tree per capita resident, and that's 80,000 on average. I knew there's another 80,000 until we maxed out. Now, what a lot of you may not know, since we're all Bay Area people here, is that Alameda is not an island. The city of Alameda was dredged from 1894 to 1902, I think it was. Turn of the century, it finished. It was connected to, we were the peninsula of the East Bay of California, called Alameda. The land known that is I sit upon, which is unceded territory of the Ohlone in this area, Lee's John. And so this area here was dredged and created into an island. However, before that, this area, not West Oakland, not through the lower part of Oakland underneath Lake Merritt, but Alameda, this territory was the United States single coast live oak stand. probably could Google that, but there's a book in Alameda that was written in, I think, 1974 as part of a dissertation to establish the fact or codify it. This was the single largest coast live oak stand in the nation. Right now, I don't think we have 3% of those coast live oak left. Alameda and this island, these trees, probably had over 200,000 trees, of which most of which have been removed. But I said at 80,000, and we're in a climate emergency right now that we have declared as a city and as a county. I said we could afford to add that other 20% that is missing off the table. And that's how we became 100,000 trees for humanity. As I said before, we are an urban reforestation solution. We got our start with this guy's smiling face, but we've moved on. As I said, it's not about planting trees. That is our tactic. This is about rewiring ourselves as a community. As I said, we use a community organizing strategy to accelerate carbon sequestration by connecting people to the planet, one tree at a time. The way we're doing that, it's a symbol, it's a metaphor, but it's still a valid metric. One tree per resident, plus 20% for the climate. We're going to plant trees and plants and understory. We're promoting urban farming, so we decrease trips to the store and increase access to fresh foods and vegetables in our urban centers, in our neighborhoods. We need to cool our communities. We need green roofs. We need rooftop gardens. We need to soften our shorelines. We're increasing our bee populations. Our tree advisory board in Alameda has not one, but 3 apiary specialists, basically beekeepers. This is a clarion call, if you will, for the planet. And that's what we're here to rally communities to do. I mean, we all know the problem. This is reality right now. Seattle, Portland, Canada, China, Italy, Greece, California, Australia we saw go up, which blew scientists' mind. They called it a black swan, something they didn't even or couldn't even predict in their modeling happened. The unimaginable happened, where 80% of the circumference of a single continent was burning at the same time. This is a climate in crisis. The problem we know is too much carbon in the atmosphere. What I connected from Greta with what we couldn't see, but we saw the effects of a wildfire is a symptom of a problem. The problem is our carbon emissions. The problem is a life out of balance. I think it's called Koyaanisqatsi, if any of us remember that film. Life out of balance. And so what we have is a planet that really is on fire. Our house is on fire. And when I heard her say that, I knew exactly what she felt and she could see. And it wasn't just a metaphor, because the reality it's playing itself out all over the globe simultaneously with extreme heat days. These wildfires, last year alone, 2,262 simultaneous complexes. A complex is when one fire merges with another fire to create a complex, a unity of fire, which is much greater in magnitude. One complex where multiples combine. There were 2,262 complexes simultaneously burning across the Western United States alone. Last year, we had over 100 consecutive smoke days last year. The effect on our health, not just from the smoke, but from the lack of trees to filter our air, provide us with that soothing, if you will, de-stressing It's called biophilia, reaction we get just by looking at beautiful green. We can do something about this, but we must do it now. And planting trees is our solution. We need to increase our tree canopy. That's what's capturing and sequestering the CO2. It's also restoring natural habitat. The reason for the bees, if we're planting that many trees, we're going to need a lot of pollinators. We're going to need understory trees and shrubs as well, and pollinator plants. This is what provides us a balanced ecosystem and balance in our communities and balance in our lives with cleaner air and healthier community. And the goal in time is to right size and to restore our climate. Now, this slide I love because look in the upper right hand corner, it's from the Nature Conservancy. Nobody does it better than our institutions in environment. Trees have over 26 co-benefits. One tree in terms of its mechanism, it just doesn't provide greenery for us. That's aesthetic, but it's also neurological. That effect is called biophilia. Literally surrounding or just looking at trees out your window reduces stress in our bodies, which reduces trauma, which trauma creates stress and creates diseases in our bodies like cardiac disease and increased levels of stroke. These are tied directly scientifically and medically to the presence of trees or the density or lack of density in our neighborhoods and communities. Trees filter the air. You know, the bodies and the leaves of trees. Sometimes you walk past trees that you could see the leaves on the ground and bushes, and there's so much soot and black particles and dust. And I always thought, wow, someone needs to hose off our trees. But it's like, no, this is what trees do. And when it rains, actually, the material and nutrients, usually if it's captured from the dust that travels from other areas, it washes off right to the drip line, and the trees slowly absorb that through the ground. But trees also filter out the particulate matter of our air. Pine trees, spruces, conifers, and sequoias, these family or genuses of trees actually filter the air of toxins, of volatile organic compounds. Other trees do not, but conifers, pines and spruces, they do. They actually absorb those diesel fumes and noxious fumes and make our air cleaner. We know trees with shade cool our communities. 3 well-placed trees can reduce your energy costs in a home or a structure by up to 33 to 35% per year, and correspondingly, your bills as well. Trees, from an infrastructure standpoint, all those oak trees that used to be here, not only do they create climate through a process of evaporate or sucking up water and evaporating into the sky, is called transpiration. One mature oak tree will transpire 300 to 500 gallons of water a day. If you wonder where that atmospheric river comes from, yes, the Amazon is one of the largest contributors of it. Yes, the Congo is too. But every tree is doing its part and job as part of its balance in nature. And it's our job to help to restore that. But where we're focused on right now is our impact. How does this impact our communities, our health? How is equity involved in this? And it's about improving public health. Now, Kaiser Permanente did a study in 2016. Actually, it wasn't Kaiser, it was the US Department of Forestry. And they approached Kaiser and asked for their data. I don't know how many other insurance companies they approached, but only Kaiser consented. And it was the first time ever that an insurance company had ever shared data. And what they did is they cross-tabbed the data or intersected it with the negative health data of where did these health indicators lie on a zip code basis. And they tied it to the presence of trees in community, the tree density, the canopy. And what they found is that for every dollar spent on a street tree, not a tree out in Tahoe or the wildlands or in the open range, but street trees that line our city streets. For every dollar spent on a street tree, it returns $5.82 in benefits. These benefits, you can see my mouse there, in terms of reducing heart rates or cardiac disease, I should say, and strokes, asthma. West Oakland has the third worst asthma rates for children in California. If you go to calenviroscreen.com, CalEnviroScreen is an online map. Put in your zip code, it pulls up your city, or just zoom in anywhere in the California, and it shows you immediately the air quality. West Oakland looks like a black thumbprint. And actually, all of 880 going from above West Oakland, it's I-80 as it swings past West Oakland, becomes 880 and goes all the way down to Fremont, a quarter mile off of 880 in north and south directions is a black streak. That is the level of bad air that is coming from emissions off of our freeways. But by investing in trees, the benefits can be felt or experienced within not 20 to 30 years, but within 4 to 6 years based on the USDA Kaiser study. So this is what we can be doing and should be doing by planting trees, improving our community's health. But trees are also, as I said before, they're green infrastructure. That oak tree, in absorbing groundwater, keeps that groundwater table with thousands of oak trees, not in check, but constantly in balance as it's transpiring that. These are green assets. Of those 9 million street trees here in California, they absorb $10 million in carbon storage, $18 million in removing air pollutants, $41 million in catching rainfall. Here's 80-20 for you again. 18 to 20% of all rainfall in a city, 18 to 20%, never touches the ground. Stays in the canopy of the tree, on the leaves, twigs, stems, branches, and down the trunk. The tree is a supreme distribution system. Nature has always been in balance. We have set it out of balance by removing and paving over and making surfaces impermeable with concrete and roofs. Trees also, as I said before, they reduce our energy costs, and they also increase property values as well. There are many benefits of trees, but where we're focused on is the impact they have in our communities, and that's with the equity value. Our plan is to not just keep doing one-off tree plantings, but we are asking cities and communities to invest in Alameda County Urban Greenbelt. As I said, down the I-880 corridor, we're going to plant 1 new tree per capita resident from West Oakland all the way down to Fremont. Right now, we're working with the cities of Alameda, city of San Leandro, West Oakland Initiative, we just announced and kicked off on Monday. And we did so, I should say, with a generous grant and new partnership from the Cal Berkeley Haas School of Business, our new partner, who's donating 400 redwood trees, coastal redwoods, that we'll be planting in 4 different communities here in the East Bay. These are the kind of investments and focus and action now that we need to be putting in place. We need to link tree funding to public health goals, and we need to focus, as I said, on resiliency. And that starts with paying our staff good paying jobs and wages, livable wages, not minimum wages. And we're tying them to workforce programming. So they are getting educated and trained for the next phase 2 level of jobs. Phase 1 is getting the fire put out of the sky that Greta talked about. We need to decarbonize and draw down carbon. Phase 2 is focusing on a regenerative economy. We can't hit phase 2 if we don't make phase 1 goals by 2030. We can't be working on phase 2 unless we hit phase 1 goals. If your house is on fire, you don't start talking about how we're going to put in, well, maybe we'll expand the room that burned down somewhere between the kitchen and the living room. We don't do that. What we do is we pick up a bucket. We say, hey, there's a fire. We pass buckets to other people. We dip it in the water. We line up, we pass buckets, and we put out the fire. If we don't put out the fire, how can we talk about reconstruction? We've got to get the carbon out of the atmosphere, and we must do it by centering nature. And we do that by centering our frontline communities and planting there first, where it is an inequity of tree canopy and health benefits that they get by having these nature trees and plants in their communities. We need to hire from those impacted communities first. And their initiatives and tree boards need to be BIPOC-led as well. That is how we need to begin this initiative as a Greenbelt, an Urban Greenbelt Initiative here in Alameda County and abroad. How we get there, as I said, is with on-the-job training, not just training them about once you learn how to dig a hole and drop a tree. No, it's about urban forestry and the relationship to the built environment. It's about biology and horticulture and permaculture and climatology and food sciences. These are trainings we have for our on-the-job training program in our framework in the Urban Greenbelt Initiative. We have workforce development relationships right now with the Bay Area, the California Community College Consortium. It's too many C's to actually get it out simply there. The California Community College Consortium Workforce Development Division reached out to us when they heard about our programming to say, you know, we have these things called Pathways to Careers. And when I looked at their website, which was beautiful for an institutional website, it was beautiful and clear and understanding, simply to be able to identify a program or a direction or a future career trajectory and just sign up for programs. And it shows you what classes you need. We, in our program, say that the funds we are bringing in to pay people, when funded, we are paying people 20%, notice again, 20% of their time, of their wages goes towards workforce development, training, and classes. We're asking for 1 year and 2 year commitments. And we will pay for your training so that once we put the fire out, once we get through with phase one, and we've gotten the carbon out and we've cooled the planet by under 1.5 degrees Celsius, once we do that, then these people, our community members from frontline communities, are not only competitive, not only ready to learn, but they're trained and employable for work in that regenerative economy future. We're also creating pathways to high road green jobs with labor unions here in Alameda County. We've begun a conversation with the Alameda County Labor Council, their Climate Jobs and Justice committee there. They want to know, how can we create this same program with pre-apprenticeship programs and journeyman training? So we're going to start that as well. You want to go straight into installing heat pumps and retrofitting our electrical systems, you could get a job right through a union. And that is good work and guaranteed work as well. So this is what we're advocating for. Focus on our frontline communities, focus on nature in their communities, and provide the pathways so that we're educating people along the way, but paying them to where they can stay in their homes and stay employed and provide for their families with this kind of a model. And so again, this is about high road green jobs. It's about building that infrastructure that will be working to filter our air and remove carbon. That's with green transit corridors and rooftops, green roofs that I spoke of before, and treed building construction. What I really love, just to fly back real quick, is right here. This photo, if any of you have ever been to Milan, Italy, this architectural firm, Stefano Boieri. Boieri has just rethought architecture, a building with 1,000 trees on it. It's now called a vertical forest. In the footprint of what a high rise is, in the footprint of what could be 4 oak trees, there's over 1,000 trees and plants going up this. This is the future for how we need to be thinking and providing. This is also the future for our built landscape, for all that carbon polluting concrete and impermeable surfaces. We need to be decarbonizing our transit systems, decarbonizing our transportation systems, increasing the amount of greenery to cool our communities and provide the good paying jobs in so doing along the way. Of course, none of this will be possible unless we're focused on the survivability of all these trees that we're putting in the ground, and that means maintenance. And for the next 2 years, we're asking people who plant trees to actually be the steward of that tree and to water that tree once a week for the first year, once a month for years 2 and 3. We're issuing forest stewardship certificates to each person who plants a tree and accepts that responsibility. But this is where we actually now have a community that cares. And this is what we're growing. We're planting trees for health and for climate and for future. Sorry, I'm getting misty here. Don't ask me why, maybe I'm just my age. But tell it's very passionate. This storyline wouldn't be complete without you in it. Wherever you live, wherever you are, you want to get involved. You already are involved. Excuse me there. You're the Sierra Club. At home when I was growing up, we had 4 magazines that I would be buried in. First and foremost was National Geographic. I had 4 decades of National Geographic, thanks to the family of Ruth and Will Anderson, family friends of my parents, who she was a consummate collector and gave us, by the time I had my first 1974 book in my hand, which was new, we had 35, 40 years of National Geographic. I saw the world in so many different ways before most people even knew it existed. Second, I had National Wildlife. Third, we had National Audubon, National Audubon. Fourth, we had Sierra Club. So many of us have seen so much beauty and nature and have been in it, but we really haven't had to value it the way we need to now. My invitation to you is to start wherever you are. Declare today, you will do just as I did. You will start your own local tree board. You will take a cheesy flyer with 9 words on it as I did, a WordPress doc, and I put it up online on a Facebook page saying, I'm planting trees in Alameda. If you want to learn how, come to a cafe. And I gave them my 6 slides of a PowerPoint. 6 slides. It wasn't this. This looks good. That was really cheesy back then. And that was only 2 years ago. You could do the same. We're in this together. And the only way through this is going to be together. Start your tree board where you are. Commit to plant trees for the climate. You need to choose a planting date. You don't need to keep talking about it. You don't need to analyze. Greta kept it simple for us. The world's on fire. You need to pick up a bucket, dip it in water. You need to cast it. We need to choose a date. We chose ours was Earth Day 2020. We all know what happened in March. That really literally put cold water on that one. But it's a new day, and we can't take no for an answer. We remove one threat in Washington. First, to immigrants. Second, who were fleeing drought-torn countries where food insecurity and strife was all led, fueled principally, often, by climate. We saw the Paris Accord literally not fall apart, but saw a major player be withdrawn. Thank goodness that got reinstalled. But there's so much more we need to do. We can't wait on governments. We can't wait for policy. We can't wait for funds to flow. We can't wait. And we each can do our part and just go out tomorrow and get a tree and plant one tree. That would be your contribution, but then not inspire, invite others as I'm inviting you. Organize your communities. Begin to find people who are as passionate as I and each one of you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on this call. You wouldn't be with the Sierra Club. You're here for a reason as much as I am. You are these passionate people in this list here. Invite your friends. Look at there, top of this one. I'm so proud and happy to have Sierra Club at our backs and leading the way for us and opening doors. I can't thank Olga enough. I can't thank Igor enough. In the Southern Alameda with Martha Krieger and that crew enough. Sierra Club is still leading the charge in the way. All these resources are your resources, but it takes getting involved and being you and bringing this forward. Our organization meets those UN Sustainable Development Goals. We are aligned and will be moving these forward so that we are leveraging on the previous, if you will, knowledge and relationships and science to actually make this a reality. And that's what this is about, as I said, planting for resilience, for greener neighborhoods, reducing our energy loads and consumption and banking our carbon to cool our planets. So that's 100,000 trees for humanity. That was my coffee talk. Yeah, this has been a trying week only because it's Friday and I don't know where Monday through Thursday went, because the last thing I remember is a report that I was told was going to come out earlier of the previous week, where a friend of mine, who shall remain nameless, is associated with the UN, who lives here in Berkeley, called me and said, we need help because we don't think people are going to act, and we need help in getting the word out, not about the word, but getting scientists to start saying they're scared. Because when the canary says it's scared, that's your last gasp. We can do this, but we can't do it unless we do it together. I invite you to join me. I invite you to come plant trees with us, whether it's the grouping trees we're going to be doing starting in November with Haas in these communities or other. But please start where you are. And with that, I want to say thank you very much for allowing me this time to speak to you.
That was great. I am so inspired, Amos. Thank you. So let me see. I put a link to 100,000 trees for humanity in the chat. Should we go there to follow up with you and plant trees and learn how to do what you're doing? And you need to unmute.
This is where that COVID brain kicks in. I'll drop my contact in there that you can have for whoever wants. I'm a texter. Feel free to call or text anytime, but texting is better over email, only for the fact that I am just buried in email. But if you do have something to read at length, or if you want to make an introduction to someone else, please, of course, use email, but feel free. My phone is open, my door is open. The amount of love and response that this initiative has gotten, it's mind-blowing. Sincerely, it's mind-blowing. And I'm so fortunate. I mean, we have an advisory board of members spanning from Barcelona, Spain, to Boston to here, who are really keeping us on mission and advising us. Literally, it's like, well, what can you do? Plant trees. It's like, no, we're building a network and we're building a framework. When funding does come through, this all happens. Right now, we're just planting trees, but the ability to hire at scale from our communities to actually be doing the 87 trees per day that we need to be planting in our communities. 1 tree per capita resident over the next 8 years and 3 months. We have to get this job done, and we will.
Oh, that's great. I guess I'll just invite people to unmute themselves and chime in, ask questions.
I just want to say that the Northern Alameda County Group, which is part of the San Francisco Bay chapter of the Sierra Club, works primarily from Alameda to San Leandro on the west side of the hills. Also has a tree planting program. It was started by a volunteer probably 10 years ago by now. And that group raises funds for the trees. They buy trees and have volunteers plant them in the residential communities in Oakland. They focus on Oakland. It's got started with one Sierra Club volunteer came up with an idea when the city of Oakland trimmed its tree committee or staff from like 15 down to 2. And they weren't planting any new trees. They could barely keep up with maintenance of city trees. And one of the activists with the Sierra Club got this tree planting program started. So if you want to help plant trees in Oakland, you can go to the website and find when they're planting trees and sign up to help.
So that gentleman, if I may, put an addendum on what you have. That gentleman from Sierra Club who started in 2008, Mr. Arthur Boone.
Right. Thank you for his name.
Call me, text me out of nowhere and quote unquote was the most terse text I've ever received. Hi, I'm Arthur Boone. We need to talk.
Sounds like Arthur.
And I was like, okay, whoever it is, they introduced themselves and nobody does that. So it must be an older person.
Correct.
And I was like, okay, this is December, I can tell you the date, December 2nd, 2019. And I said, who are you? And he told me how he got my name. He said, Sierra Club people here in Alameda have been talking about this initiative and yada, yada, and that. And I said, okay, we can talk. I didn't want to ask him who he was over text, but like I said, we sat down at a Starbucks here in Alameda on a Saturday afternoon. And I knew I was in for an education. Upon learning his story of being a minister and retiring and starting recycling, possibly unarguably the first recycling program in the Bay Area, if not, who knows, in the nation in the 70s. And doing the work that he had done, it was only a fait accompli that he would start a tree planting program in 2008. It wasn't, they cut it from 12 to 2 people in the city of Oakland. They had a staff in Parks and Rec that was maintaining all the trees and grounds. That was 250 people, I believe.
Okay.
And they cut it down to about 50 or 55.
Okay.
Notice the ratio there, folks.
Yeah, huge.
Notice the ratio there. I'm telling you. And so I was like, okay. And then he told me he did what he did. And I said, and I listened. And he said, so that's why. I said, okay. So why are you sitting in front of me? Why did you come to me? And I'm only so proud and humble to say this was his response. He said, because we've been doing this for years. And he says, and I heard what you're doing. And for the first time, you're the only one who has a program that gets us ahead. And I said, but you've planted 4,000 trees in Oakland. He says, but we're losing. Boone, 2 months later, did a training a month and a half later into 5 Alameda High School students who contacted somebody at Sierra Club here locally and said, we want to learn about trees. We were given an assignment. 5 of them go to the library. He invites me, why don't you come here and talk with me with these kids? I'm like, I don't know kids. What am I going to do with kids? I got 2 of them. I can't talk to them. They don't listen to me. What am I going to do with school kids? I went and I let him do all the talking. And I'll tell you, the most important thing I learned was the history of trees in the world. We used to have 6 trillion trees. Notice, used to have 6 trillion trees. Boone said, we now have roughly, is it 3.5 trillion left? We've lost over 50%, 55%, I think it is, almost 60% of the world's total volume. And that's only in the last 150 years to 180 years. The mass of those trees has been depleted. Right now, we're losing per annum over 15 billion trees a year. We cut down and don't replace at the rate. We're planting trees, but we're still negative 15 billion trees a year. When he said that what the plan that we had with 100,000 trees was the first to go net positive, blew my mind. And he didn't let me say anything about it. And he just leaned forward and said, and that's why I'm putting myself on your board.
It sounds like Arthur.
I didn't have a board, but guess what? Now I did. He made himself, he said, I'm going to be 2 things. He said, I'm going to be not chief planning officer. He said, I'm going to be your chief safety officer. And I said, what's a safety officer do? He said, look, if you're talking about planting 10,000 trees on Earth Day, you're going to have 1,000 volunteers. He says, don't you think people are going to be walking in the streets, meandering all over the place? You need to coordinate with it. He had the whole thing down. He said he's going to be my senior advisor and second, our chief safety officer. I've never been so pleased and blessed to feel that I've literally touched the crown of his head, not the crown like a king's crown, of Jacques Cousteau for water in all my worldly delights, or even if it was Ansel Adams and how he captured literally the beauty that John Muir talked about. Yeah. Okay, that's Boone for me. So yeah, I love what they've done in Oakland. Sierra Club Tree Team, Derek and the current crew. Have not yet worked with them. They have, truthfully, most of my data is predicated upon what they shared transparently with me to help me get started for all the questions I had. So we started with a good strategy that maybe they didn't have, but they've already done the work. They're doing the work. And that's what needs to happen, but we got to scale what they're doing. So like I said, we're starting in West Oakland and in 4 other communities here too.
I think I'm so excited about the redwood tree planting.
Yeah, it's, I can't wait to get oaks in the ground. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
I have a question about like the redwood trees, because unless they're in a very particular climate, are they going to be the right, I mean, they're beautiful.
Right tree, right place.
Are they the right place? Yeah. How sustainable are the redwoods?
There's plenty of arguments. The first is going to be, I haven't have a tree. I always want to jump to my wiki. We've got wikis on everything. We have a tree selection and prioritization wiki just for what do we do to plant a tree and in what order. So what are our questions? Like we're solving for first, is it native? Second, is it solving a climate or an equity, or what are we solving for? Is it groundwater? Is it for air purification? Is it for shade? We're thinking all these things through to get the right trees in the right place. But at the same time, we can't overanalyze it, folks. This isn't about designing nature in all these areas. We literally kind of just got to get trees in the ground. But the answer to not scope it all up, but for the redwoods, yeah, West Oakland is not ideal. High ground is better, not salt, and they need moisture in the air. high degrees of humidity, high degrees, wrong term, but high levels of humidity, higher levels, the fog is what redwoods thrive on. So the hills, the Oakland hills, where the fog, that tongue of fog comes in over Alcatraz right to Albany Hill and then bleeds off on both sides for a good about 5 miles in each direction. It usually fades out, peters out around Dwight and Berkeley, but it still goes up into the hills, and that's why the hills had so many redwoods. It was a nice cooler climb. You're not going to see too many redwoods in Alameda. There was like 2 species. I think we had not California buckeye, maybe we had bay laurel, and we had the oak, the coast live oak, and other scrubs trees, but mainly underneath an oak, you're going to get nothing but just a lot of dead space over time, which is okay, but it's different scrub. And so can they be planted there? The answer is yes. Can they be planted successfully and thrive? The answer is yes. And why do you want to do that? The answer is a second part of that selection matrix. The answer is biodiversity. A quarter degree change or a half degree change in temperature, we don't know what's going to happen, which fungi or microbials or pests may now start thriving that attack which species that we didn't see coming. Nobody saw Australia coming. Nobody saw the oak root fungus coming. Okay, we got to cool the planet, and if not by any means necessary yet, but we've got to cool the planet. And directly, can redwoods thrive? Yes. Do they exist there? Yes. In parks first, and they grow in groups. Please never just plant one redwood. Please never just plant one redwood. Plant 2 or 3 and plant them 6 feet apart in a nice geometry like a triangle. So within the footprint of what one mother tree would be, you actually are growing 3 trees when you look at it. And they're beautiful that way because they grow up. So it's a narrow footprint. When we're donating, I got the Sequoia sempervirens on my deck here. I got 18 of them, and I'm giving them out and giving them away and trying to get them rehomed here in Alameda as fast as possible. But the thing is, I'm offering people like, oh, I want a tree. I'm like, good, I've got 3 for you. And they're like, what? And I just say, look at the mother tree. And I said, within only 6 feet, we put 3, and they grow up that way. So we're increasing habitat. We're not solving for shade, but what we're doing is getting more carbon out and adding more to the environment. So we need strategies like that. There's another strategy. Look this one up, everybody. I love this one. Or actually, no, I'll drop the link for you, and you can follow it later on. It's called, what is it called? The Miyawaki method. Miyawaki method. Spell it phonetically and you'll get it right. Miyawaki, Miyawaki method. And Akira Miyawaki went into nature. He was doing one thing and he decided he wanted to do another thing on sustainability. And he literally went into the forest and started studying the nature of the forest. Long story short, and a lot of good research later, what he ended up doing was noticing the patterns. And he noticed, after finding out that within his hometown of Tokyo, the total number of native trees was fewer than 4% of all the trees there, native. And he went into the forest, and the most important thing I think that he found was, which we're now calling the Miyawaki method, was that trees don't just grow like we plant them 30 feet, and then another tree on the street 30 feet, and then in front of this next house 30 feet. That's called prison. Trees are alive. Trees talk. I'm looking for, I won't look. I love the fact that this book just came out. See if it focuses on it. Is there enough light? Oh, there we go. No, we can't get it to focus on it. Oh, there it is.
Hey, guys.
There
Yeah.
it goes. Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. Why is this important? One, it was recommended to me by the arborist and forester of El Cerrito, who talk about synchronicity. My parents raised him in our church as one of the church youths back in the day, 4 years older than I, who finds me on Facebook 9 months ago. And I'm like, what do you do? He's like, trees. He goes, what do you do? And I'm like, this is crazy. Out of Bexley, Ohio, of all places. Yeah, Stephen Prey, look him up. And he was at Cal Berkeley prior to that as being forester. And he recommended this book, Finding the Mother Tree. But if any of you have heard the podcast or read the book, The Secret Lives of Trees, or if you read 2 years ago where they released 2018, 2019, the scientific study that it was more than a postulate that trees actually dream. And a gentleman was measuring the electrical flow of information in trees at night, that the currents change. And the hypothesis is that the nature and there's activity that presumptively could look as if not consciousness is happening, but there's a pattern that approximates the rhythms of not sleep cycle, but perhaps dreaming. This book kind of begins to substantiate that, where she shows that it's not just finding the mother tree, but that the mother tree and all trees share information at the root level. They share resources. They will offload carbon from their systems to other neighboring plants and shoots. So I cannot say enough. I can't wait to meet her, because the questions that I have are some serious stuff. But when you pair what she has with, well, let's jump back to Miyawaki. Oh, did I put in the chat? Here we go. Let's pair that with Miyawaki. And why Miyawaki? Oh, better yet, we could do better than just pair it. We can play it. It's the beauty of share screen in this medium called Zoom. So what we know about Miyawaki is that his studies show that trees grow in tight bunches, not 30 feet apart. And those tight bunches, if you will, what happens with an oak tree? An oak tree will drop 20,000 oaks, but they don't just drop them 30 feet apart. They just grow where they land, or where the jaybird picks it up and may drop it somewhere else, but they grow in groups. And I thought, well, if it takes a village to raise a child, what does it take to raise a tree? And Simard says, it takes a forest. They grow in community. They need community. So Miyawaki's method is, in 1 square meter, don't plant one tree and then go 5 meters, which is 25 feet or 6 meters, and plant another. Within each meter, you plant 3 to 5 trees. And people are like, well, wait, no, they're going to compete. What, are you just trying to get the one that's going to grow the fastest and strongest? Like, no. What he shows is that nature, by planting 5 tall canopy trees first in your first year, they actually do compete for sunlight, but they compete equally, like 5 friends in kindergarten, all trying to be Jesse Owens in track. We're all just little tigers, and nobody's really going to be that fast than the other, but they grow pretty similarly. Therefore, they grow faster because they are competing. Know that. Second, once grown, Miyawaki forest, also called microforest or pocket forest, Google them, or you hit the wiki on Miyawaki. I'll share the link to my Miyawaki in our wiki to you guys as well. We have all the research and photos and diagrams and everything that we found online, that it's all cited and linked to. They not only do they do that, but Miyawaki forest, where is it? Miyawaki forests also sequester not twice the carbon, but 40 times the carbon. I love the way your head turns like my dogs used to, Kim. No, we always do it. They go, wait, what? 40 times the carbon. So do we need to plant 100,000 trees? Yes. How is how we get ahead. By following Miyawaki method. Right now, it's the #1 method of planting across Europe. Look in the Netherlands and in other places. They can't establish enough Miyawaki microforests and forests. By increasing high density or planting high density forests, high density microforests and pocket parks. We're increasing habitat, increasing greenery, increasing biodiversity. With that, I should say, with that, the biodiversity is really where the boon comes in this whole thing. And it's just lastly here, I'm going to share this and shut up if I can, but I'm going to play this for you and turn on the sound so you can hear it too. This is absolutely stunning, the information you're about to get. Let me restart it. That was quick. Grow 10 times faster, 100 times more biodiversity, 40 times more carbon. This is a way forward. This is where and how we need to be planning in our urban communities too. It's all about density, high dense forests. So why am I excited? Because there is hope. Nature works. We got to follow the patterns. We have to follow the patterns and help support her for what she does best.
Oh, thank you, Amos. You are an inspiration.
No, thank you again. Yeah, indubitably. So yeah, I'm inspired only because I know nature works. It's how we can get ourselves out of the way. And just like I said, support her for what she does best.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.